Good evening, Ben.
Evening.
We're being a little less formal this evening. It's 5 after 7. I'll call the meeting to order in a minute or two.
Tony, this is
No,
Peter
no.
Kotzenberger. I can't hear anything. I just want to make sure I'm on.
We can hear you.
I don't think there was anything being said, Peter. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Good. All right. I think we've got just about everybody here.
Recording in progress.
I'm going to call this meeting of the Mansfield Town Council to order. This is our April 21st budget workshop. We are hybrids, so some of us are here and some of us are calling in. The first order of business is a roll call. Ms. Chain?
Osberger.
Here.
Berthelot.
Here.
Bruder.
Here.
Coleman.
Here.
Bertoni. Kotzenberger.
Here.
Moran.
Here.
Curran.
Here.
Shaken.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Staff reports and communications.
I do not have anything, Madam Mayor.
All right, budget review. So we're moving on to flagged items.
So tonight we don't have a PowerPoint presentation. We have some handouts that have been circulated by email, and then hard copies also distributed to those in attendance tonight. So I will do a screen share to show the table that's up on the screen. Okay. So this is basically a summary of all the questions, a running list of the questions that council members posed to staff, starting with my first introductory presentation of the budget back at the end of March 30th. And the questions are roughly chronological. I think actually in the order they were even posed during the meeting, but starts with the 30th and then ends, you go all the way to the end of the document to April 13th. So last week's budget meeting. Some of these are more substantive. Some of these are simple kind of transactional, almost like yes, no type questions. So I will put them up on the screen, but Madam Mayor, I don't know if you have a preference for how we go through these, if you want to go through.
I think we need to go through from the beginning to the end, all the way through on each one, but I didn't get the hard copy. Is there a spare hard copy? So,
Okay. Do you want me to, or do you want to
or
read?
Charmaine or whoever?
Okay, well, so the first question, there was a question on March 30th about the grand list and the substantial increase in motor vehicle values. I think it was somewhere around a 25% jump year over year. And so part of that explanation, or that explanation kind of boils down to, and anybody who's on the market for a used vehicle right now knows used vehicle prices are way up, but also, as I understand it, the Department of Motor Vehicles has been playing a lot of catch up in terms of accurately capturing what municipality various vehicles are actually garaged in. And so I don't know what percentage kind of explains what, but the combined percentage year-over-year increase is a combination of the rapidly escalating market value of used cars, as well as Mansfield essentially getting credit for a much larger number of motor vehicles within town limits than it previously had. And then there was also a question about the modest decline in the real estate grand list value, around 0.3%. And after conferring with the assessor's office, this is attributed to more commercial property owners filing timely income and expense forms. We have fewer accounts right now being assessed a 10% penalty for either non-payment or late payment.
Mr. Aylesworth, the stark drop in real estate value that you were just discussing, why does income and expense forms have anything to do with assessed value of commercial property?
I posed a similar question. I would invite our finance director up to explain why in the great state of Connecticut that is so.
Evening and welcome.
I understand it from our assessor, is that that actual penalty is applied to the assessed value of the property during the at that window of time when they are supposed to submit their forms. And when they pass that deadline and they don't get any relief from the BAA, the Board of Assessors Appeals, then that particular value is assessed to the property. And that's what the taxes are charged against, the mill rate is charged against.
It must be sufficiently significant fee in
It
order
is.
to actually contribute to a decline.
It is, on commercial properties, it is.
Okay. Homeowners don't need to worry about this, however. Residential homeowners don't
Correct.
need to worry about it. Okay, thank you.
Also on March 30th, there was a question posed by Mr. Osberger regarding care and support for Region 19 students in the past by Youth Services. This is a somewhat more detailed explanation. I don't know if you wish it to be read into the record, Madam Mayor. We also have Pat Schneider on the line if there are more follow-up questions on this.
Do any council members have any questions on the youth services increase in staffing? There is this one question about what happened to Region 19 in the past. Do you discuss this position later on in this list?
I
Because
believe
we had some questions about this as well.
Let me just look ahead. I believe it appears again, but one second. It does appear again in the conversation about should it be full-time or part-time, so I don't know if you-
Okay.
Yep.
All right, then, seeing no questions, Mr. Osberger?
Yeah, I see the response here. My question, though, somewhat answered here, regarded the transition from the Youth Services Bureau with Dr. Haney, and that they created a separate high school because there was that period where my daughter was now transitioning from 8th grade, and they decided to create a high school group. And Dr. Haney would go over there as well, and it was with Chuck Levins, and it was with Dr. Haney, and it was with, at some time, it was with Pat Michalak. And I understood that that group was there for quite some time, and now I'm understanding that it perhaps got dissolved. And I'm reading some things from Kelly and everything that's saying that there's an increase in mental health issues at the school, and be curious if that was a program perhaps we should be doing still. I'm sorry.
Terry, Ms. Berthelot, your mic isn't on.
I think that's what they're proposing. That's why we're talking about it,
I see.
is a new social worker.
And I was curious, it'd be along the same vein as what we had. It was, a group setting, and it was, in my opinion, very effective.
I don't think we've heard anything about the actual nature of the program. We've heard something about needing a staff member to work with the middle school and the high school with those kids. Now, I know that the nature of programming has changed over the past 5 years. So, and we haven't been asked to weigh in on that kind of specifics. And so here, what we're being asked to weigh in on is whether we want to add a part-time social worker or part-time somebody for the purpose of working with kids both in the middle school and in the high school.
Well, and what I could say is that the model that we had was an absolute lifeline for parents transitioning from 8th to 9th grade, as there was nothing at the time.
Right.
And without it, I don't know what we would have done. And many parents felt the same as well.
Yeah, that was a very popular program. We've heard about it for many years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's proceed to the state police.
So there were some questions also posed on the night we introduced the budget regarding what precisely the functions of the quote-unquote admin officer would be, and also some questions related to whether or not there's been an increase in the total number of full-time patrol officers in recent years. And so Sergeant Merrill, our new resident trooper supervisor, is with us tonight. I think he's off camera and muted at the moment. Try to find him. There he is.
I'm here.
And actually, Sergeant Merrill, since we just did a very, very kind of, not even really a true introduction of you at an earlier meeting, if maybe you want to get started with just telling the council a little bit about your background, what you did before you came here, and why you're excited to be here.
Sure. So I've been in law enforcement since 1998. Prior to coming to the state police, I was with a couple previous state police agencies and local law enforcement. I got hired in 2010 by Connecticut State Police, and I started at Troop C, which covers 10 towns. So I was patrolling, including Mansfield at the time in 2010. I was at Troop C for about 3 years, and then I put in for the Tolland resident trooper position, and I was a resident trooper in Tolland for about 3 years, where I was a part of the youth program and several other school programs to include DARE. I then put in for Ellington just to try something different. So I was in Ellington for about 5 years, and once again involved with the youth there as well, community policing, stuff like that. That's where I kind of found that the community policing was really important, and that's where the resident trooper program excels. I received my degree from Westfield State College, and I have a wife and 2 kids. So that's kind of the quick background of me. And I recently was promoted about a year ago, and I spent about 7 months as a sergeant at Troop H. A little busy over there. And now I'm back over here, and I'm excited to be a part of Mansfield. And I think it's important that, resident troopers are a part of the community. It's ingrained in me from 8 years of being a resident trooper. And I saw the positive impact that it had on not only high school, middle school, grammar school, but knowing the community and getting them to know their law enforcement, just not in a kind of a negative light, more positive experiences and getting to know the community. So that's a little bit about myself.
Have you had any experience with a community with a high percentage of higher ed faculty and students in it?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Have you had any experience with a college town, really?
A college town? No. Except for when I was at Troop C, participating in what we call party patrol, stuff like that, and regular patrols at the college during events and stuff like that.
Do you anticipate some differences between this community and the communities you're used to?
Oh, definitely. Each community is different. Yukon makes it unique to Mansfield. And fortunately, we have a good relationship with Yukon. I've recently been meeting with them, even though I've been here for just over a week. I've already met with Yukon officials about 3 times already, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Yukon affects Mansfield immensely, quickly. And I think it's important to have open dialogue with them And I think it's been working so far.
Thank you very much. I know that the resident troopers before you have left a legacy of community policing and some real reform over the past decade or so. So we've come into a good position, I believe.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Aylesworth, where do we go from here?
So I guess, I would just invite the sergeant to perhaps, speak a little bit about what this position would be, the roles and responsibilities as envisioned of the position. And I guess I can speak to the question that was asked about FTEs or full-time patrol officers in the past. My understanding is that we're actually right now, at this point in time, with a sergeant who serves as the resident trooper supervisor, and then 7 troopers that are patrol officers. We're actually at, basically as low as we've been since initiation.
Correlation, that drop, and problems?
Well, I would let the sergeant speak to that, but I would only say that I know, when Sergeant King was here and we spoke about this regularly, and before him, Sergeant Timmy, there was definitely a sense that the existing, officer pool, as it were, was spread very, very thin, and that there were gaps or delays in response, providing service, responding to calls for service, because officers were preoccupied with other calls. And you're still going to run into that unless you have an exponentially larger force. But I do think that there's a sense that that demand for service considerably outweighs supply right now. But Sergeant Merrill, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
I actually would like also to pose some questions before he speaks, so that to sort of narrow what concerns are, because I think our concerns might be different than he expects. If so,
Okay.
Mr. Sharon just asked a question, and he might want an answer for that before I.
Let's start with Mr. Shuren's question about is the size of the troop reduced because there have been fewer problems, and is this an adequate size?
No, the reason for the low staffing is due to attrition, retirements, and the state's not actually testing and going forward with filling positions. That's the only reason. It has nothing to do with how society is, if it's busier or less busy. It's only due to the fact of the preparedness of the state, and they chose not to hire. So then we had a mass amount of retirees, which we're going through right now, which is going to get worse and before it gets a little better. So the goal here is to hire more troopers and hopefully backfill some of these positions, especially Mansfield in particular, because Mansfield's a growing community. It's only going to get busier. And by busier, that means our troopers are going to bear more of a burden, which will then cause us to be able to patrol less due to responding to calls being limited as the limited number of troopers we are in Mansfield already. So, going forward from this office, ideally, we would want to have more resident troopers to further be able to give adequate police services to the town, and specifically dedicated to the town, because the state police covers, and Troop C covers 10 towns. And it's divided amongst 5 troopers or 6 troopers. And typically when they go on calls, you have a backup. So if one trooper is covering 2 towns, and then you have another trooper that's covering 2 towns, and they go to one call, that means there's 4 towns and they're going to one town for that call. Now, 3 other towns have to wait for services from surrounding troopers. And that's what's so important about the resident trooper program, is that the troopers that are in Mansfield, they stay in Mansfield, they work in Mansfield, they respond to calls in Mansfield. They're not being sent to Wellington. They're not being sent to Tolland. I mean, they do occasionally do that, as a backup type purpose, but their primary function is to supply police services specifically for Mansfield.
And my recollection in response to Mr. Shuren's question is that we did reduce the number of state troopers for budgetary reasons at one point. So it had nothing to do with need. It had to do with our share of the fringe benefit costs going way up, and some concerns about the availability of pilot funds.
And was there then a demonstrable and concerning decline in the level of service that we received? Or were we just able to get by?
I think the answer to the
So-
question, I was just going to say, we may, because there's been such turnover in the ranks, we don't have somebody here with us tonight that probably could quote statistics, because we just don't have the institutional memory, unfortunately, but that's certainly something that we could do a little research on.
And part of the problem is that the data which tells you about response times is collected by the state police in a way that that has not in the past allowed us to back out Mansfield data in a specific way. I don't know whether that has changed or not, but that was one of the real issues when we went looking at the potential for a municipal police force. Ms. Berthelot, you had some questions you wanted to ask.
Yes, thank you. First, welcome, Sergeant Merrill. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
I share Mr. Shuren's concerns, absolutely. And if we can't get hard statistics, I would hope we could get some anecdotal information about the need to justify this very significant expense. And of course, safety is paramount, but in the same breath, we need more than a sort of statement of we need this. Some actual evidence would be super helpful in terms of appreciating and us making an informed decision. That said, the reason I asked to ask a few questions before you got started, I guess what I'm looking for it is in a sense an understanding of where time is going to be spent. Certainly, it's been expressed that this will be a community policing position, which is really key, and we, I'm sure, all want to see this position in that role if it happens, that this would be somebody who people know the officer's name and feel like they're known, the police officer, the state trooper is known. I'm also, though, very concerned about the idea of having this particular state trooper in the schools. I know that we're being told that this is a good thing for kids, but there's an awful lot of data out there that says that having police officers in any role in a school actually can be damaging to kids. And in the past, we had the school resource officer. There was a contract in place to explain what the relationship would be. We've not been given information as of yet as to what this relationship will be, how much time the state trooper will be in the schools. And of course, we're all very supportive of the juvenile justice role that the juvenile justice diversion role that this person will play. But I don't get the sense that that's hours and hours and hours of work, and would like to know how many hours are expected and how much of that work will be this person's role, how much time this person will be spending. So just to give you a sense of what I'm looking for. Thank you.
But maybe before Sergeant Merrill, if he has anything he wants to say to that, I just want to clarify that, so this is definitely, envisioned as being fundamentally different from a school resource officer. It's actually in a school. This would be a person who still, would be based here in Town Hall, but would have primary responsibility to respond to and liaise, if you will, with the school community. So I think whereas, obviously, if you have a school resource officer, the sort of structural nature of what you described would make a good deal of sense. Their primary assignment is here, and it's just envisioned that that would be essentially what their portfolio would focus on. So we're not, contracting with, per se, any of the schools, and they're not contracting with us for service. We're trying to, address a gap in a community need.
What percentage of their work will be in the schools?
I'm going to ask Mr. Merrill, Sergeant Merrill, to answer that, and then that we have questions for Mr. Osberger, followed by Mr. Shaken. But first, Sergeant Merrill.
Okay, in regards to the amount of time in school, is that what I'm?
The question is,
requesting?
what is this person going to actually do? And we know that he or
Okay.
she is going to be involved with discipline issues at the school. And the question is, how much of the position's time do you expect to be spent with children in schools?
Well, ideally, we want to do as much as we can, but not too much. I mean, our function isn't to police children in schools. That's not what this position is. It's actually called an admin position only in the fact that that's the schedule that they would have, is the during school hours type of thing. And the reason for that is they would be there for the school as needed. The school actually the schools reach out to us and request random things like to come in and just give presentations, talk about policing, talk about school youth programs, talk about the court systems too, and just give a general kind of presentation to students about, the kind of things that are going on, safety, aware of different things like technology and websites that are out there. These are things that we get steady requests in our office, and unfortunately, we don't have the resources to give this information to them. And the admin trooper would also be DARE certified. I would send them to DARE instructor school, so they can also be in the schools as a DARE instructor, talk about drugs and alcohol. And also the admin trooper will be part of the JRB, which someone had already mentioned, Juvenile Review Board, and the Youth Services Board. And that's important too, because these students would see that admin trooper not daily in the school when the schools need them, and also to do these type of community events. And if something did happen, they would recognize that trooper on this board. And they would come up with ideas for the student to give back to the community if something happened. Some other things that this admin trooper would do is assist with a liaison for UConn, as well as we started a police mentor program for youth in town that I have to, outsource one of my troopers and kind of figure out patrol mentoring and kind of juggle that. And it would be nice to have this admin trooper be dedicated and the same trooper every time for this police mentoring program for these students. And, their function as an admin trooper outside of school when that ends would be also to be giving a part of the town patrol and additional resource in the summertime and items like that. And that's kind of the plan going forward with this additional trooper.
It's sort of unfortunate to ask Mr. Merrill all these things when he's only been here a week, but Sergeant Merrill.
That's okay. Let's do it.
He's doing a fine job.
Mr. Osberger, followed by Mr. Shaken.
And I believe Brian had his hand up also. We say that there's been a drop in the coverage. How many troopers do we have on now? Last I recall, it
We
was
have
9.
7 troopers and a sergeant.
Okay, so we're down 2 from the last I recall.
Well, we have been up as high as 11, I believe,
Oh, I see.
but we are way down.
Yeah, yes, that's correct. 11.
I think we've been at this number for a number of years now.
Okay, do we
Not
get,
new.
we get mutual help from UConn, don't we? I know they have 35-plus officers there that can go into the community.
We get mutual help when the state police request mutual help. The police on UConn's campus are sworn in as constables, but the state troopers are very careful to maintain their jurisdiction, which means that unless they are actually requested to assist in a specific instance, they have no authority to leave the borders of the campus, which means they can't go into the road, which is a state road. Right?
That is correct.
The campus ends at the curb. If the kids are walking in the street, the state police have to deal with it.
I recall there was a time when these things you described that you want this administrative person to do was handled by the principal. That the direction, how did we get away from that?
That's a question I know how to answer. I think the principals still handle this sort of thing all the time. I think that when the police are asked to come in, it's something of a more serious or threatening or frightening nature. Yeah. Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Coleman, followed by Mr. Kotchenberger.
Sorry. Thank you. I have a couple of, I think they're sort of similar questions to what Terry was asking. So I think everyone is right in terms of our number of troopers. I think when I started on the council, we had 9 troopers and a sergeant, and for a total of 10. And I think there was a budget year where we had to reduce those numbers around the time that the state changed the way that they calculated the cost and started billing us a lot more for each trooper. And they've since changed that back again and have started billing us less. I guess I am hearing 2 different things. One is that we need more police capacity and staff because we are having occasional issues responding to calls in a timely manner, so emergency calls. And on the other hand, that we need this additional staff person primarily to perform the duties that Sergeant you just laid out, that are, that the state police and state police parlance call that an admin trooper, someone to work days, to work part of the time in schools, part of the time doing sort of proactive patrols in neighborhoods, and part of the time handling some of the relationship duties that you in your position have often tried to juggle with the university and with our renters and the community and those kinds of things. And so I'm sure you would take 2 extra troopers if we were offering them to do both of those things. But I agree with Terry that it would be helpful to get a sense of some of the response data, some of the call data, so that we can get an idea of whether we need more. And my question is, there are many advantages to the resident trooper program, and I'm a big supporter of it over the alternative at this point. One of the disadvantages is that we don't have as much municipal control over our police force as we would over a municipal force. And so if we were to hire this or contract this additional trooper, what obligation besides your word, which is I'm sure very good, would the state police and our resident trooper's office have to sort of assign this trooper to the duties that you've outlined in your budget proposal? Which is to say, if a need arose for someone to switch shifts and start working on a night shift or something and not do these admin roles, does the council have the ability to sort of set in a contract or some other way this as policy that it would be executed? And I have a follow-up question that I don't want to make it sound like I don't believe what you're saying. My follow-up question is, if there's a need for this admin person, what possibility might there be to assign one of our current troopers into this role, and what consequences would that have in terms of your office's ability to provide adequate coverage during the rest of the week, the rest of the shifts when our current group of troopers is working?
Sergeant Merrill?
Okay. So the admin position that we are looking to create here is governed kind of by the sergeant in the office, which would be myself. I understand what you're saying as far as my word. We have a union contract, and we are part of collective bargaining. So the state police can't just decide if this goes forward and we have this trooper that's doing great for the town and good community resource. They can't just decide that they want to change it where they would be just on patrol and not bother with the schools and not do any community policing. It's a change in working conditions, which we have a collective bargaining contract for. So
sorry to interrupt this, because there's a parlance in the state police that I think we're all just trying to understand. So when you and Sergeant King talked about someone who you called an admin trooper, that's not just like a slang term that you would use to police term to talk about someone working the day shift in some of these roles. That's an actual like job class or working condition within the union contract. We would be getting someone who already had, who was an admin trooper or aspired to be one, basically, who is off patrol and working admin duties.
So typically, when this is approved, what'll happen is I would select someone in our office and see if they were interested in this admin position. And typically what happens is they test for it. And I would determine based off their willingness to be a part of the community, their willingness to go to their instructor school, and their overall willingness to be the best fit for the town of Mansfield. They would be in that position exclusively. And the only way that position would ever change are for two reasons. One, that the town decided they no longer wanted to fund it. Or two, the state said they no longer want to provide a trooper. But the state wouldn't be allowed to change their working condition, as I call it, and say they're going to be exclusively patrol and now take it from a community resource type position that I want it to be.
So that's really helpful. I didn't know until just now. I didn't understand that this was I'm searching for the right word, but this is a role that.
Classification, an actual job classification.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's very helpful. And Tony, I'm not sure if you can see, but I know Brian was waving
I
his
know
hand around a
Mr.
little.
Coleman is
Okay.
next, followed by Mr. Katzenberger.
Good evening, Sergeant Merrill.
Good evening.
Mr.
You are a
Coleman,
resident
before
state
you
trooper.
start, Mr. Aylesworth, can you raise the sound volume? I'm really having a little trouble hearing. It's not just me.
I think that's done in the booth.
Can we do something about raising the sound for people who are hybrid?
That certainly would help.
Or does the host do this? Can the host do?
I'm pretty sure the booth adjusts the volume in the
Ah.
room. Because we've had this issue before and it's been addressed. Yeah, isn't that what that's what we're looking for. Okay. Yeah, pump it up in the room.
People listening at home can raise their own volume, but
Right.
we don't have any controls here. There's no button in front of me that allows me to raise it.
Okay, I'll go ahead with my question then.
Yes, please.
Sergeant Merrill, you're a resident state trooper in which towns?
Holland and Ellington, sir.
Okay, Townsend's kind of a similar town to Mansfield outside of the university. How many resident state troopers does Townsend have?
So Tallinn right now has 4, I believe.
Okay.
The
and
demographics are
Yeah,
different
and
there.
how's that working out for Townsend as far as, coverage and backup? All the calls being met with the 4 troopers?
I don't have that data. I have not spoken with them. Like I said, I've been at Troop H and I was in Ellington prior to that. So I've been out of Tallinn resident spot for over 6 years now.
Okay, thank you. I was just kind of trying to see what other towns are doing and get an idea outside of Mansfield, what's happening. Thank you.
I wish I had more for you, sorry.
From everything we can hear, towns our size have, unless they're totally relying on the state police, have more police officers in town than we do. Mr. Katzenberger.
Thank you, and welcome, Sergeant. It's very nice to have you in town.
Thank you, sir.
So I wanted to follow up a little on Terry's questions, but on this, the idea of one officer, administrative officer, particularly dedicated in part to the schools. Do we have and I don't expect you to have this information, right in front of you, of course, the number of calls or non-routine calls, that's whatever classification you use, to the Mansfield Public Schools and then Region 19 over the last year or two? I'm trying to get a sense of how much of this is, it calls for the need for a trooper or any police officer to be at the schools is because of emergencies or a situation that requires immediate attention, as opposed to some of the, equally or more, equally important day-to-day operations such as DARE program. Because I wasn't aware that we actually have any problems with response time or things like that to the schools. But I also, my assumption was, and it may be incorrect, that we in fact don't have many emergency calls to schools at all. But I don't know if that's the fact and how that's grown or declined over the years.
I don't have the data on that. I think it's going to be a little difficult with COVID and non-COVID. Comparing statistics, I would only say that if I had to, and I hate to use this word, if I had to guess from what I'm hearing prior to me even coming down to Mansfield, I heard a lot of calls coming out of E.O. Smith, some pretty severe calls where, kids have gone running on foot into the woods and we've had to use canine and other resources and all this kind of stuff. So I don't have the raw data that you're looking for, but I do know that we've been called to, in particular, E.O. Smith several times for several things in the past month that I'm aware of. That would have been nice if we had that admin trooper who was already familiar with some of these kids and we'd be able to kind of talk to them and get maybe phone numbers from them to call these kids when they did do this stuff and kind of talk to them and relate to them, instead of us having to get a canine and all this other stuff. So, that resource of having that admin trooper is so invaluable. And I'm sure parents would definitely appreciate the fact that their child can relate to a resident trooper on a, not only a formal aspect, but a personal aspect that may change that child's decisions based on that interaction with a trooper.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Aylesworth tells me that Katie Bell, who is our Youth Services Bureau Director, is available, as is Pat Schneider, Human Services. I'm wondering if somebody from that office would care to comment on the need for this particular position. I see. There you go, Katie. Welcome.
I thank you for having us. So I know some of the questions were related to the amount of time that we anticipate youth services to have need for the connection for the additional position of a trooper on an admin schedule. So right now with the restorative justice diversion team, we are scheduled to meet up to twice per month for a period of about 3 hours. So that would be potentially up to 6 hours monthly of a trooper time to be part of the circle of that team. Now, we know that the number of referrals that come through a juvenile justice diversion program are going to differ at different times of the year based on, just what's happening in a community and what the emerging trends are in the community. So there might be instances in which we don't have any referrals and we might not need to meet that month, but we might say have an instance where there's a special trip that's happening, that an instance happens that ends up with a lot of arrestable offenses all happening in the same time, and we might have a real big influx of those referrals that come through. And that might be school-based, that might be community-based. And knowing that there could be a need at other times to add additional hours into how many times that diversion team might meet. But on average, we would anticipate needing that trooper to be available, committed for those 3 hours twice a month. The second and fourth Thursdays are the current meeting times in the evening hours to accommodate family and youth needs. The other program that Sergeant Merrill spoke to is the trooper mentoring program that we started as a pilot program this year with some Mansfield Middle School students that they've just been having a wonderful time with. And that's been approximately 2 hours a week of trooper time that the kids have been thrilled to have. We've been thrilled to have. And that has just been a pilot program. So if we are looking at expanding that, it has the potential for additional hours attached to it, as well as was already brought up in the question before the trooper question, if we are looking at expanding services to better support the high school, that could be an additional service that might be a meaningful intervention for not just middle school youth, but also for high school youth as well, to build that community connection and that community policing model. The other interfaces that we would have from a Youth Service Bureau perspective on an ongoing basis would be that Youth Service Bureau Advisory Board time that does meet once per month. And that's for about an hour typically. And so having that same officer being connected throughout helps us to kind of hear some of the trends that are going through the community as part of our monthly report outs and sector trends and things like that, as well as would be able to give our office insight into any other trends that they are seeing, even potentially outside of schools that we're not aware of, whether it's trends in substance use, trends in what youth arrestable offenses are currently. I think unless we have been dwelling under a rock, we are all very painfully familiar with the impact that TikTok has had on a lot of communities this past year, and seeing increases in school graffiti, school violence, and things like that. I know in our connection with the Mansfield Middle School, they are all very attuned to those concerns and keeping an eye on it, but certainly kind of that extra piece of what might be happening outside of a school component would be useful information for us to continue to have access to. So those would be kind of the main core components of the ongoing services that would be in connection with an additional trooper. And then looking at that role of juvenile justice diversion and restorative practices and things like that, having a trooper who might be available to attend those meetings as part of their duties would certainly increase that connectivity and that understanding of restorative justice and things like that. The other thing that is, a new trend that we will all be continuing to watch. We've kind of gone through this pandemic time, but another role that the state police do have in our community is responding to youth cannabis possession charges, and the way that has changed with the legalization of adult use. So the way that has changed for youth possession is that there is a tracking system that is facilitated by the police, and depending on the number of offenses that are reported is an outcome measure of what would be expected, whether a youth is going to be seen in diversion, whether a youth is going to be seen in general as a referral to a youth service bureau, or whether it is going to reach the level of referring out to the courts. So that would be something that would continue to have police intervention in response to. And we know with the legalization of adult use cannabis in the state of Connecticut, as well as the anticipation of the commercialization and availability, that those calls are likely to increase, which is also going to increase likely referrals to the restorative justice diversion team. So those are all things that we can anticipate that are in need right now. And then we would also be looking at how do we continue to partner in other ways that serve the community, in that community policing model, in that prevention model, and kind of looking at those partnerships.
Thank you. Could you please tell us what the mentoring program consists of?
Sure. So the mentoring program that got started this year as a pilot program actually was not initially geared to be a police mentoring program, but they stepped in to kind of really help us out. We have a few Mansfield Middle School students that we wanted to really get connected in deeper ways when we had to transition some of our UConn volunteer-based mentoring programs into a virtual capacity, just given some logistics that were coming up around the Omicron wave, how it was hitting, and our anticipated availability to have consistent volunteers with us. And there was a crew of kids that we knew we weren't going to be able to engage in a virtual capacity. So kind of looking at how do we find a connection? How do we find a buy-in for kids that might not connect to an arts and crafts activity, but are really looking for some more hands-on interventions. So right now that mentoring program consists of about 5 middle schoolers, and it is facilitated by Youth Service Bureau staff and an officer, as well as a couple of volunteers from EO Smith, who are in, I believe, their senior year of high school. So it's really kind of developing that positive role model opportunity through those hands-on activities. So whether it's Foursquare or Knockout, or they went fishing the other day down at Bicentennial Pond, really kind of seeing positive models in the community of who can I be like, and what does it mean? How do I build this connection, particularly to a trooper, to have that positive connection? And what does it mean to know a police officer in their sneakers as opposed to in their badge, and kind of having that connection to community is a very special thing.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shuren.
Just so I'm sure I understand, as described, this admin position with its many facets is full-time position or more. This person could not be somebody assigned because of the classification as backup should there be a need because of the low number of other state troopers.
Sergeant Merrill?
So all troopers, whatever their capacity is, throughout the entire state are always backups. That's how it always works. Doesn't matter if you're a police officer or a trooper. If there's a trooper in need, you always back that trooper up. Their primary function would be in town. And if there was a need, an emergent situation where it was immediate, they would respond to that. However, that's not their primary function. I would not exclude a admin trooper going to back up another trooper for officer safety or for the safety of somebody in town or an innocent bystander because they were in an admin role. Their primary function would be specifically the schools, the town, community. There may be that 5% chance that there's an active scene, and I would request them to respond to that active scene. I mean, that's a part of that community policing as well. They could actually respond to that scene and they could know a child there and they could make an impact. That's the real world. That's what we do as troopers. So I'm not going to tell you that they will never respond as a backup, but this admin position is not for backing up troopers. This is for the town. This is for community policing. This is for the youth board. This is for general community policing to interact with the town of Mansfield.
We've spent an awful lot of time on this one issue, and we have a lot of issues in front of us. So I'm hoping we can move on unless somebody has a pressing question. Okay, the next item is a question from Mr. Coleman regarding Public Works increases in staffing. Mr. Aylesworth. And Mr. Coleman is not the only person who had this question. He may be the only person who spoke at the moment, but.
So in multiple presentations that I've given on the budget, we talked about, so one of the things that's in my budget is a request to add 2 additional full-time employees to DPW that would be assigned to drainage work. And there were, I think, questions and comments made by council members of a few different varieties on how this crew would be used and whether or not 2 is the right number, and also what work along these lines could be contracted out to a private firm in lieu of hiring town staff. So I would turn the microphone over to Mr. Carrington to speak to this in more detail.
Madam Mayor, before John starts, can I make a inquiry/request?
Is it Mr. Shaken? Go ahead.
This is me. Sorry. Yeah, it's Ben. There's a question that I posed on April 13th. And this document's arranged by date, but there's a question. It's on the last page of the document for partially completely selfish reasons, but also just for ease of thinking about things reasons. Would it be helpful if we tackled things more by subject than by date that the question was raised, so that John could talk in totality about the drainage crew rather than once now and once in several hours?
Yes. So I'm looking quickly through this.
We're on the second question.
Right.
And they didn't put them in groups so that like my questions are all together.
Okay, so there are, Ms. Schneider, I think you are not muted and you're having a conversation.
I
There we go.
Okay, so basically, they're both the same question. One of them is it needed? And the other one was, how do we do it better? So, Mr. Carrington.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe I probably answered this first question in my presentation because this was at the budget kickoff or somewhere at the beginning, but obviously an extra drainage crew would help us get more drainage work done. Therefore, we could pave more roads quicker. So that's the idea, is get more drainage work corrected faster. Therefore, we can pave roads faster. But that would require, not only the operational budget of staffing the crew, which the current request is for 2 members of a 3-person crew. But if we added another person, that gets it to a full crew. And if we added another, because I think Councilor Bruder asked about adding a second crew, obviously the second crew, doubles that. So, an estimate is anywhere from 210,000, 250,000 annually to get 3 people, just, with all their benefits, roughly 70,000 per person, but that's if we got all laborers and promoted other people. So 2 crews would be somewhere between 420,000 and 500,000. There'd be other incidentals in the operational budget for that. Capital, if we had additional crews, we'd have to get equipment for them to outfit a crew. This year, if we get the 2, I don't really need to outfit the crew, but if we go to a full-size crew, I would need equipment for them to have their own vehicle, their own working trailer, and other equipment that goes inside that trailer to get the work done. That's approximately $125,000 for a crew. That would be equipment that would last at least 10 years or more. And then the capital also for the crew, we would increase the paving budget. If we added 1 crew, we could, increase it by 50%. So right now it's 1.3 million. I'd go to 1.95 million. And if obviously 2 crews would double it from 1.3 million to 2.6 million. With Councilor Shakin's question, I did come up with some roads. For the current year, I came up with a plan. If the council wanted to add roughly $1.1 million, I could get, some roads that I could do full depth with not much drainage work, just replacing catch basin tops. So that's basically a Davis Road and the 2 Monticello Lane and Felon Road in that area. We could get all that full depth reclaimed and paved, and that's roughly $480,000. Then we could do some mill and pave, where we mill off 2 inches of the road and put back 2 inches of asphalt on 5 more residential roads, and that's about $300,000. And then there's some roads we could just do an overlay of asphalt on the existing.
John, you muted yourself by mistake.
When did it go out? I don't know when I hit that.
You were about to talk about the overlay.
Okay, and the overlay, sorry about that. The overlay would be on 8 roads, or some of them are the complete road, other segments of the road, but that would be just bringing in a contractor, putting a 2 inches of asphalt over the existing pavement, and that's roughly $263,000. There's including this, not including this number, is some drainage work that would have to be done and other incidental. So that's why I rounded. That was about $1,041,000. I rounded it up to 1.1 million. But that's, in future years, I can't do the same thing because those are those 5 roads that I would do mill and pave are the only 5 roads that are mill and pave candidate until we get to roads that we've already paved 15, 20 years from now, 25 years from now, when they need to be resurfaced, that's when you go back to mill and paves. So it's not something that could, eventually we're going to run into roads that either have to be full depth reclamated with a lot of drainage work, and we'll do the roads that aren't so bad. We can do the Cape seals that the council already approved and things like that. So hopefully that answered the questions.
Mr. Shakin, does that answer your question?
I think it answers it most of the way. I mean, I have a sort of just broad and general question, and it's a question for informational purposes because I'm not sure that there's an easy way for us to be able to afford to do this quickly. But so I appreciate that explanation, John. And I guess before I get into the broad and general question, my specific question is, the budget asks for two new positions, which is 2/3 of a full crew. It doesn't ask for the capital to outfit a full crew. And so what would the budget proposal as it sits, sort of without any changes, provide in terms of increased capacity or faster or more comprehensive road paving than what we're doing right now, versus if the council appropriated substantially more dollars, hired a full crew, outfitted that crew, put more money into paving, contracting, et cetera? Is there a place where there's a better sweet spot in terms of return on investment, or are you very confident that sort of the addition of another two folks would sort of meet the council's loosely stated goal of trying to accelerate our paving activity?
Well, the two will definitely accelerate, but it's to accelerate the best way. And a full crew obviously does more. 3 people would do better than 2 people, so it's not going to be as drastic a change. And we went without the equipment because we could do that with 2 people. We could work it out, but it's not going to be ideal as a full team, an outfitted team. And I'm going to defer over to Brian Lavoie, since he's been on here for an hour. Let him chime in. Go ahead, Brian.
So if we went with 3 additional people and outfitted them, and I have to be quite honest, by the time we get the people in here, we'd be looking at next year increasing the paving budget, just because of getting people on board and getting the equipment that we need. We would actually, when you dedicate, right now we dedicate 2 people, 2 crews to drainage, but right now one of the drainage crews are grading gravel roads and stuff like that. And so that kind of hinders us until they're done with gravel roads, and then they'll jump onto a road and start doing the drainage. That would not happen with the 3 people. They would be absolutely dedicated to nothing but drainage, along with the crew that we have now. And there's a lot of variables. Will it increase the volume of paving we do? Absolutely. I'm confident it will. It's the outfitting it is not good. It's going to take some time, but because equipment right now it's like with the grapple truck. When we had to come in front of the budget, the council several times to increase that just to get the grapple truck, because things have just gone crazy with equipment. But long story short, to answer your question, yes, a crew would absolutely increase the volume of work that we'd be able to do for paving.
And the plan I presented, the 2 people, if we got those 2, the plan I presented, that the 1.1 million, we could accomplish that with just the 2. So that's why I was given like a quick fix, but long-term, we need a full-size crew more if you want to accelerate. So if we went to an additional crew, a 10-year plan turns into a 7-year plan. So roads that are on 10 years out, really not even in the plan, but we know after the 5-year plan, we'll get to them. We moved that up. Obviously, if you double the crews, we can turn a 10-year plan into a 5-year plan, or more like Brian's, the way he was talking, that we really don't get the impact the first year. So like it's an 11-year plan into a 6-year plan. But it's,
So I will just, speaking for myself, I have some interest in, based on our last conversation, or I guess I missed the budget presentation because of my work obligations, but based on your last presentation to the council outside of the budget process a few weeks ago, I am personally interested in figuring out how we can do exactly that, how we can accelerate a 5-year plan into a 3-year plan, and how, because I have, looking at that 5-year plan as you all presented it, identified just personally roads I drive on my side of town, a number of roads that are throughways like Codfish Falls and Wormwood Hill that aren't even on the 5-year plan. And so they're on the 10-year plan, I'm assuming. But in terms of what can we do in the next fiscal year and the budget in front of us, we need to pass a budget in a week and send it to town meeting. And I would like to have that budget start the work of acceleration. If what you're saying is, if we said, let's hire 3 people July 1 and outfit the crew with equipment, that you wouldn't be able to have those people start paving roads until the 2023 construction season, then I'm wondering if there's a possibility of putting some dollars in the budget for something like that, but delaying the hiring and the outfitting until halfway through the year or something along those lines, while providing you the dollars to do some of the paving you can do where you don't need drainage work done in the current year, with the understanding that you're going to need drainage work done on everything else in the future. So I guess my broad question is, what I would love as an option as we consider how to do the budget is you as the experts to sort of come up with here's what we could do to turn, here's what it would cost to shave a year off the 5-year plan, to turn 5 years into 4 years, or to shave 2 years off the 5-year plan, to turn 5 years into 3 years, and give us how you would do that in the next fiscal year so that we can consider whether it is something that we can afford to put in the budget. I mean, they're big numbers, but I think, I think Councilor Coleman has brought it up, but I agree that there's a need to pave faster. And as you all have noted a lot, the issue is drainage, not to mention that we've got a failed culvert on one of our roads that was not expected. And there may be more that are in need, and those are expensive projects that having staff to be able to take care of them in the midst of accelerated paving would be good. So if you could put something like that together so that we can, a menu, if you will, of options, so that we can try to choose which one might make the most sense in the broader strokes of the whole budget, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, like, maybe I didn't state it clear, but with the 2 people and $1.1 million, I can get a lot more done. Plus the 500,000 for the Cape Seal. A lot of roads will be touched this construction season, and this fiscal year into next spring, if that happens. And then next budget, I can come forward with a plan, assuming we get a full crew, and how we can accelerate, that 5-year plan into a 3-year plan, and a 11-year plan into a 6-year plan, things like that. Because we can't go out to hire somebody till July 1st, usually that takes a few weeks to get somebody in. So you're looking at middle of August by that time the person comes in. So we only have 2 months left of construction, but those 2 would help for everything that's going on if we did that.
So what I'm hearing from Mr. Shakin is, can you give us an updated plan that might get us along a little faster? The other thing I want to throw into this mix is, what is the plan for fixing Hunting Lodge Road? This does not appear in the budget, and I think we really need to put something in around that. Is there a plan for it, Mr. Carrington?
I'll defer to the town manager as to where those funds were coming from. We are going out to bid to get a design firm to design the replacement, and then we'd go from there with construction.
As far as the, the money for Hunting Lodge Road, the council, so movement was not made to alter this year's capital plan to reflect that. The thought process was, and then the timing was such that, you know, we didn't necessarily want to shoehorn it into the list of projects that were proposed for the surplus pilot funds for the last meeting. It was kind of so late breaking. So ultimately, what I would propose is that the funds, it would be a good candidate for some of the additional or the remaining surplus pilot funds for the council to consider using for that purpose.
Okay. All right, Mr. Coleman, you have your hand up.
Yeah. First question I have is in the Mansfield Tomorrow Planning and Development, there's mention of a policy the town has called complete streets. I don't see that being done when we pave the roads. Why not?
This is similar to Chafeeville Road. There's not, every road can't be a complete street. You know, the geometry doesn't allow for it, where you can put in a bike lane. You know, somebody asked me about Browns Road, putting in a bike lane. Well, bike lane is at a minimum 4 feet wide. If you put that on both sides of the road, that's 8 feet. So now you're taking a road that's 22 feet wide and turning it into a 30-foot wide road. That's hard to fit anywhere. And
What about
plus,
Hillendale Road?
Hillendale Road isn't connected to anything right now, and at the time, it wasn't the need. It all comes down to money. If you want to spend $3 million on a mile to get a complete street in, which we're doing with Maple, then this is going to turn into a 40-year plan, 50-year plan. Every road can't be a complete street in the town of Mansfield. That was
I've been getting a lot of photographs from residents around town where catch basins aren't even catching water, drains aren't catching water. I'm not really all that thrilled with the work that's out there.
Well, it's one resident, Brian, and we've dealt with him, and I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
there are
not
others.
it's not a lot of people. It's not true. It's one
There are others.
person.
There
No,
are
it's not.
others.
So
Then they can call 3332 and talk to me.
Well, I'd like to mention the basin that was in reference. So when you connect 3 pipes into, I mean, we could have not put a basin top on there, and we could have put a manhole on there, a manhole cover, but you still, because when you take drainage from the wooded area, you get debris and everything else, and it gets collected into the sump, and it's easier for us to clean out the sump when there's a cover on it. And that's why the basin in reference is a flat top. If it wasn't a flat top, it would have been a manhole with a manhole cover on it, which would have been a lot more expensive to put in. So that's exactly why that was done that way. It was
Why
a
is
cost
the-
save. Excuse
Why
me.
is the drain settling on Mountain Road near 62 Blacksmith Shop Road? That's already settling down. You replaced that last year. There's problems out there. There are.
And I've been telling the council for 8 years, there's problems out there.
Yeah.
It's not with our construction, it's with what's existing.
Yeah. Well, you guys replaced that one on Mountain Road last August, I think.
Well,
Sorry,
first
settled.
I've heard of it is tonight, Brian.
Yeah.
I
So, Brian,
think
when
we
you-
need to encourage individuals with complaints to go directly to planning and to Public Works, I mean.
Yes.
The council is not a place for us to debate individual drainage problems. I really,
When
we
we're
are
talking about hiring a
policymakers, and our
drainage crew,
policy
we're
around public works is to support the
talking
department.
about hiring a drainage crew, okay?
Well,
That's
I'll
what we're
answer
talking
Brian's,
about. Totally
I'll answer-
relevant.
I'll answer
No,
Brian's
the
question.
problems on individual places where there are problems should go directly to the department and not take up the time of the council.
Well, I have a disagreement on the union contract as well.
I'm sorry, Mr. Coleman, that is not within your range of ability as a council member either.
I could certainly bring it up,
You
Madam
can
Mayor.
complain
That's what
about
I'm
it,
doing
but
now. That's right.
it is negotiated according to state law, and the council has, the only authority we
it
have
allows
over
for
it is to
subcontracting,
accept or
Madam Mayor.
reject it.
It allows for subcontracting. It does. And we subcontract so many other things. And now, just one particular issue, drainage, we can't. I disagree with that. And I want an answer from our town attorney, please, on that contract. That's what I want.
So you want to destroy morale of the existing workforce by giving away work that they do, that is their work.
You
Mr.
accuse
Coleman,
me of
I think
something.
this
that-
whole
I
discussion
want
is
the
out of
roads
order
paved,
at this
thank you.
point.
I want the
Mr.
roads
Coleman,
paved. That's what I want.
Mr.
Not
Coleman,
morale. I
Mr.
want the
Coleman,
roads
I am not recognizing you. I think this discussion is out of order at this point. We will move on to another topic. Does anybody have any other questions of Mr. Carrington regarding Public Works? All right, the next item on our agenda then is facilities. The new custodial supervisor position shared between the town and the Board of Ed.
One of the, as you just said, Madam Mayor, there's a new proposed full-time position, custodial supervisor position, full-time, to be shared 50/50 between the town and Mansfield Board of Education. The narrative in front of you details some of those, the responsibilities that would be handled by this person that we're looking to hire. But I believe Alan Corson, our facilities director, is with us, and I would invite him to speak to the need for the position.
Mr. Corson, are you there?
Hi.
Hi.
Yes. As I've indicated a little bit early in our discussion, that our project load has been increasing over the years, and that's not a complaint. That's pretty much appreciated, because that's a lot of support that we've gotten. But with that, our department could use the help of a little bit more full-time work with the maintenance and the projects that we have. So I'm proposing to move Bill to handle more of that, and then pick up some of the duties that he's going to leave with another position, and increase that position a little bit more to help in our training, which we do the minimum training, but we don't, we could take it a lot farther. So we're looking to do that. State requirements on our department have also increased over the years. Regulations have changed, where now we have to keep track of a lot more than what we used to. So the combination of all that is we've gotten to a point where our department could really use this position.
Now, you're going to get a consolidated school. Won't that make life easier for you guys?
To some degree it will in that, but we will still have the two vacated buildings that we're gonna have to keep some level of cleanliness to, so we'll have to coordinate with that. Our total square footage doesn't, it actually increases with the new school that we will be keeping up with. There'll be less people. There'll be 2 less full-time custodians with the new school.
So you're actually converting 2 custodians into 1 managerial position? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, you might look at it that way. But it would be something that our department could really use now.
And I just want to make sure the council, draw the council's attention to the letter of support submitted by Superintendent Lyman, because that's obviously the other half of this equation. Her last paragraph in her memo specifically addressed the need and her support for this position.
All right.
It's just because I guess following what Mr. Chaikin was saying about combining themes, there's at least one other, and I said scan ahead, there's at least one other facilities-related theme. I'm thinking of, there was the question raised, I can't remember now if it was Mr. Coleman or Mr. Osberger, but there was a question raised about the proposed lighting upgrades on the middle school auditorium. And I'll invite Mr. Corson to speak to that, but I think the summary version of it is that the current system is, on the verge of sort of failure at any moment now. It might not last a handful of years until the modernization, any proposed actions from the ongoing modernization study are implemented. But even to the extent that this work is done before the modernization study, I also believe that wholesale upgrades to the auditorium are beyond the scope of what Superintendent Lyman believes would be touched upon with the modernization study. So all that to say, the lighting wouldn't be affected by that study.
Yeah, I think we did get an answer to that in an earlier council meeting when we learned that the renovation work would not touch the auditorium. And we did see photographs of the lights. Mr. Osberger?
I recall that we hired a deputy stuff that we're asking now that we want to have a custodial manager do. Is that what I'm reading?
I think what Mr. Corson is saying is that the deputy director needs the freedom to do more deputy work and less management work.
Well, and more work on the maintaining side. So if you think of like the roles as, the custodial role, the cleaning role is distinctly separate from the maintenance role. So like if there's electrical upgrades or repair work that's done, that's a separate side of the shop. And so right now, Bill Treach, our assistant or deputy director for facilities, spends a lot of time having to directly oversee the custodians when he has the skill set to, as Alan I think was saying, do more of the work in-house or guide more of the work in-house that we find ourselves having to hire out for. So we're actually trying to find ways to do more with the in-house talent by freeing up both Bill and Alan to do that work directly.
Okay, so what, we're going to hire somebody?
Well, no, so hiring somebody to supervise the custodians, the cleaning crews, so that folks like Bill and Alan don't have to provide the direct oversight of the custodians. They can then spend more of their time on projects and the maintenance piece.
Well, that's what Bill is already doing then.
Well, right now, Bill is the direct supervisor for, well, Alan, you can speak to this.
Correct. Bill splits his time between projects and custodial. Our department takes care of both. Our project load is increased such that to have him spend more time on the projects would be helpful. I think we can actually, a lot of times when we get more involved in projects, we save the town money. So to have him be able to spend more time on the projects would help there, but then also have a position that would then pick up the difference of the custodial and do a little bit better with the custodial.
And we're also losing 2 custodians, so there's a savings there already. So this is not totally an add-on to that budget, it would be my guess. Am I right?
Correct.
Okay.
You would still have about a net savings of about 20,000, with the loss of the 2 positions.
Right, and we'd have some improvements in the quality of systems rather than just floor mopping and waxing, which obviously is not all the
Correct.
custodians
We
do,
would concentrate more on the training and more consistency with the training.
Okay, any further questions about facilities?
Madam Mayor, I would just say that the next question that comes up, it's probably more in the court of finance when it comes to energy costs, and you had asked about inflation. But there may be aspects of this that Alan would speak to in terms of our current energy usage in buildings and how that's changing over time.
Could you scroll up on the slide, please?
So this was the response to the question, and it kind of straddles two pages. I don't know, Madam Mayor, since it was your question, if you think additional information is needed.
We actually got some answers from this at an earlier meeting as well, so I'm satisfied. The next series of questions have to do with the registrars of voters who've been very patiently sitting in the audience all this time. Ms. Grenadier, Ms. Ward, would you like to come up so you can answer questions? Just as an update to the council, Mr. Aylesworth and I were at a meeting with the university earlier this week. We asked them to talk about the potential for a polling place, and we forwarded to them the list of requirements that you had provided to us. We haven't had a chance to get back to them. They will need, of course, I mean, the president is not at the level where she knows what how the buildings are set up for electrical and telephone communications, so that will require some further work, but we did forward your list of requirements to them.
So the questions,
I have a question, Madam Mayor.
Yep.
Mr. Shaken.
Just looking at the response, thank you. Just trying to put a number on it. If we were thinking about making sure that there was enough money in the budget to theoretically cover the cost of the redistricting procedure, as we have sort of talked about and as we met about the other week, which would potentially add a polling place on campus. I'm just going to sort of ask it outright. Adding up the top ends of these things would making sure that the budget is increased by at least $21,000 in the next year be a sufficient contingency to cover, or sufficient amount of money to cover any potential contingencies with the primary and the general election in this fiscal year or in the next fiscal year? Okay, thank you.
You're talking about elections next year, correct?
I'm talking about
2023.
So yeah, elections between July and next June. So that would be the state primary in August, the state election in November, and that's it.
I don't think there's the time to do that for this year's elections. There's a 90-day period. If you change a polling place, it doesn't take effect for 90 days. So that means for the primary, it would have to happen before May 9th. And, right, and both the primary and the election have to be in the same place.
So we know that there are going to have to be some changes to the primary locations at Vinton and at Goodwin.
That can't happen this year either, because the school will be open. The middle school will be open on Election Day. The Board of Ed didn't close it for Election Day, so they won't allow us to have an election at the school if it's open.
All right.
So we're not debating where polling places will be at this meeting. All I'm asking is, from a budgetary perspective, if we were to implement what we've been talking about implementing in this fiscal year, I appreciate that there may be obstacles to doing so, that $20,000 would be enough to cover, $21,000 would be enough to cover that expense.
Theoretically, yes, it would be enough to cover that expense whenever
Thank
it
you.
happened.
At some point in presentations to us, you were talking about the necessity of getting new machines. What is the time frame for that? And what is the likely cost going to be?
The Secretary of State's office has additional machines that can be used at no cost. There's a priority for towns that have had to increase their polling places based on the state redistricting. So they would have priority, but if they have enough machines, there's no cost.
What do you think our likelihood of getting the machines is?
No,
No idea, huh?
no idea.
I'm not sure.
No. Could you make sure you're speaking into the mic?
I don't think that the state knows yet.
What is the difference between the old machines and the new machines?
Don't have new machines. They're all old machines.
No, but what's the difference?
They haven't picked what they're going to use yet. They've dropped what they started to research because it wasn't satisfactory. So we're back to square one as I read the emails we get. So they do not have a contract, or they have not made a decision, or they're still testing. There is no answer to that.
Okay, and when do you think an answer will be forthcoming? I mean, is it likely in the next fiscal year is what I'm asking?
I doubt it. I mean, I don't think the changeover can take over that fast.
Okay, but the subsequent fiscal year, you think this might be something we'd be looking at?
It's, whenever the Secretary of State's office talks about this, it's imminent, but it's been imminent for the past 5 years.
Okay.
But we're getting to the point where the machines are just not adequate. They're obsolete, and there's no parts. They don't make the parts anymore, and so they have to do something soon. And they know that, but it's not happening quickly.
Maybe with the new Secretary of State. That'll be a priority.
Mr. Shaken,
I've already asked my question.
your hand is still up. Does anybody else have a question for the registrars? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, the next question we really covered earlier with Sergeant Merrill. It was just, I think we covered this topic.
Yes.
Okay.
Fine.
I would invite Fire Chief Mitchell to come up as we talk a bit about the proposed additional staffing. As the council knows, and as was presented on previously, we have submitted a SAFER grant. This is a FEMA grant to fund 4 new firefighter EMTs, 1 firefighter EMT basically for each shift. So also, as the council knows, we operate in a 1 day on, 3 day off model. So there's basically a rotation of 4. So you would need 4 people, 1 for each of those 4 days before the cycle repeats itself. Question was raised about whether or not the positions would be funded without the grant, and of course, the funding has been included in this budget year to account for the fact that we might not get the grant. Chief has made the case that with or without the grant, we need to transition from a 5-4 model to a 6-5 model for enhanced coverage and to meet the needs of the town. So I am embracing that recommendation, and obviously if we get the grants, that's great news. It'll cover the salary and benefits of these positions for a 3-year period. But just to be clear, the funding's been included in the budget to account for the fact we might not get the grant, and we won't know for sure the disposition of our grant request for some months. Official award letters will go out likely in September. We might start to get indications one way or the other, either positive or negative, some months before then, but in all likelihood, no real reliable indicators, again, up or down by town meeting. And so hence its inclusion in this year's budget.
It was my understanding from our last meeting that these were designed, this grant was designed to put the firefighters in places that could not afford them. If we budget for them, doesn't that damage our likelihood of receiving the grant?
So I don't think at this point, it's a fair question. I don't think that the review that FEMA is doing at this point will be checking in on the town's budget process. I think the concern would be if we hired the people and now we ultimately get the grant, you're looking to hire people, bring people on that you've already actually put in place, and that could complicate the matter, and they might expect us to then hire 4 more people. So that hence that this budget actually funds the position starting November 1 as opposed to July 1 or sometime earlier. In reality, if we get the grant, you're still talking about bringing people on probably in that time frame anyway. But this way, we don't make the misstep of bringing somebody on, to your broader point, earlier, and then you get the award and you can't potentially retroactively use the grant dollars to offset the cost for people you already hired. But embedded in this line of inquiry, and I'll let the fire chief speak to this, I think it was Councilor Coleman asked about whether or not there would be a benefit or a utility of hiring only 2 people, so half the request. If we didn't get the grant, the question was, would the department be better off than it is now with hiring 2 people? And I'll let the chief kind of speak to the issues there.
Everybody can hear me?
Yep.
Good evening, everyone, and
Welcome.
thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. If just hiring 2 firefighters versus hiring the 4, which shifts do you want to run heavy on, and what shifts do you want to run light on? Because the work schedule of the firefighters from captain on down is contractual. So you'd have 2 shifts with a captain and 5 firefighters on it, and you'd have 2 shifts with a captain and 4 firefighters on it. So it's kind of an imbalance. So, and you know, from a standpoint, by adding, and again, I think I mentioned this the last time. Right now we run a 5-4 model. When we drop to 4, we lose an ambulance because the captain doesn't staff an ambulance. If he did, on the concurrent calls, you'd have nobody in this town. At least on a 5 model, you'd have the captain back to stop making a call back or respond to another call along with mutual aid. I mean, it's not a best practice in the fire service to have one firefighter responding to a call, but 5's better than 4. 6 would be better than 5, you know, from a standpoint. But at least with 5, you can staff the 2 ambulances. And there have been times where we've had to wait well over 15 minutes for mutual aid ambulance to come into town. There have been times where our ambulances on transports have been told by dispatch, once you clear the hospital, you are responding to another call. So they're not even off the call they're on, and they're already being assigned another response. So, you know, from a standpoint, we do about 1,500 EMS responses a year, and we're doing anywhere between 23 on the high side to 21 on the low side, total calls for service a year or responses. So, and here's another example. Happened 11 days ago. Saturday morning around 11:12 to be exact, we were dispatched to a structure fire, house fire on Atwellville Lane. We had 5 firefighters, EMTs on duty, and we happened to have one of our support volunteers who drives the apparatus in the firehouse. So running out of station 307, you had 4 firefighters, plus you had 2 coming out of station 107. Well, coming from station 107 to Atwoodville Lane, there's no easy way to get there. Plus you had mutual aid coming in. We had a first alarm assignment. So we had an engine from Yukon, we had Willimantic coming, we had EMS from Coventry coming. I pulled up on scene, I had smoke showing. We still had an occupant in the house. By the time I got my gear on, because when I got out of my car, I reported what I had. I called for more help, a second alarm. Started getting my gear on, grabbed my radios, my clipboard, like I normally do. And I could hear the squad coming. By the time I got up there, those guys, off the truck, full gear, took the homeowner out, advanced the line. As I did my 360, I could hear the the glass break-in, because they had water on the fire. All within 6 minutes. From Station 307, the tanker showed up behind it, so we had 4,000 gallons of water. Now, if you back up your staffing, maybe the support volunteer hadn't been at the firehouse. Now you're down to 3. Now you're taking 1 truck. You're going in with 1,000 gallons of water in a non-hydrant area. 1-room fire should be able to take care of that, no problem. If we ran at 4, minimum staffing, I'd have 2 guys on that truck, waiting for the other truck to come across town, or the Yukon engine, or the Willimantic Tower. They weren't coming right away. There was, lag time for response times. I would have sent 1 guy into a building, potentially, or I would have been on that pump, and the 2 guys would have went in. They would have abandoned the pump. Those are not best practices in the fire service. So within 6 minutes, they had water on the fire, they had an occupant out of that house, and there was smoke damage throughout, but there was no extension from the family room where the fire, origin of fire. And thank God he had working smoke alarms, because that's what he woke up to. Guys did a bang-up job. And that was 11 days ago. So that's why, the Fitch report studies, references staffing, different staffing models and different levels of staffing. There was Captain Lavitt did one, presented it to Chief Dagan back in 2013. The Donahue report was done before that, and that talks a lot about merging the 2 departments, the different staffing models there, and how the 2 departments to work together. There are standards that we're governed by. OSHA 2 in, 2 out. If that engine pulls up and you go with the scenario, just 2 guys on it, and the occupant was out of the house, they could not, by law, go in until the 2 more people showed up. Because you have, for every 2 firefighters you send in, you could have 2 backing them up outside. So they would have had to wait. So, like I say, is we cover a lot of real estate in this town. Come from the southern end of town to go to the northern part of town, it takes a few minutes. But that's why it's nice to have Station 307 geographically central in the town, because it can get to anywhere pretty much within 6-7 minutes. And in this case, 6 minutes. But there was also what we call the lag time, because the occupant was sleeping, the fire had started, so the smoke, because the family room had vaulted ceilings, so the smoke had to go up, travel, get to the smoke alarm by the bedroom, activates it, he gets up, I got a fire, tries to put him out himself with an extinguisher, dials 911. So we lost that time, that lag time. And a fire doubles in size every 60 seconds. So I think it's important that, and as I made the compelling case to Mr. Aylesworth, when I presented the budget, I make that same compelling case to the council tonight to consider, adding the staffing. I mean, I'm keeping my fingers crossed we get that SAFER grant. And I'm hopeful, because we did a lot of work with it. We reached out to people that had been successful with SAFER grants, asked them to look at our narratives, but it's very competitive. So, I believe we put our best foot forward to give us the best opportunity to be awarded the SAFER grant. But if we're not awarded, we still need to move forward. And I make that compelling case tonight to the council.
Mr. Coleman.
Thanks, Chief Mitchell. You answered most of my questions. I was going to have a question about, lapse in coverage, but I think you answered those questions thoroughly enough. The only question I have right now is, do we recruit for volunteers?
Yes, we do. We do that twice a year. Since I've been the chief, which a couple of weeks will be a year, we put on 6 volunteers from basically college students. Out of the 6, we have 2 of them that are firefighter EMTs in departments, volunteer departments where they live in the state. and the other 4 are just EMTs. They work on the ambulance. And we're looking at putting a couple of fire police volunteers on as well.
When you get college students as volunteers, how long do they last?
A couple of years. It's kind of a, from what I understand, it's kind of like a revolving. I mean, they come for a few years, and it's great. We give them the exposure. You know, they help us out, you know, and when you bring an EMT on, it's minimal cost compared to bringing somebody on as a firefighter, because you got to outfit them with turnout gear and in the continuous training where they have their EMT license and where they get it, they continue their training as well. It's a minimal cost versus bringing on a volunteer that does both because the additional training on top of that.
Well, it's much different from the traditional model, which is where people in the community volunteer
Yeah.
and stay as volunteers for 20, 30 years,
Yeah.
and multi-generations of them.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with college students, we know they're only going to be on campus 4.5 years at best.
Yeah.
So, and you're not going to get them in their very first year. So it's a
Right.
very short-term, lots of turnover
Yeah.
model.
Yep.
How about the traditional volunteer, the local resident? Do you have any of those anymore?
Well, we do have, you know, we have about 7. Before I started here, we had a gentleman from the community, joined the fire department with no experience, and now he's just finishing up his level 2. Older gentleman, doesn't look his age. When I found out how old he was, I'm like, really? But good addition to the department. But you got to keep in mind, the volunteer staff we have, which is approximately about 7, and that includes my 2 volunteer chief officers, they're up there in age. And most of them are support people. They drive the trucks, they work on the outside of the fire ground. So they're not interior people. Your interior people are your career staff. I mean, they're great resources because they have that institutional knowledge that we don't, that I'm still learning every day and love to pick their brains to learn that. The volunteer model of the fire service, this is not a Mansfield problem. This is a nationwide problem. It's dying. I can remember when I started as a volunteer. I'm just finishing up, starting my 39th year in the fire service, 36 of them full-time. I remember my volunteer days and what it was like. It's not anything different. It's totally different. And you can see where we're going is we're going towards that career model. We have no choice. It's just because of the workload and because people don't have the time. For someone in the community to join the fire department with no experience, no training, with orientation into the department, you're asking them to give up a year of their life because EMT is 2 nights a week for 15 weeks. That's a college semester. The fire academy is, 16 weeks of training. So if you take someone who has a career, who has a family, and the kids, we all had them, right? Run them from here, there, and everywhere because they're involved in stuff. It's tough. And usually talking with some of my colleagues in Mass that have combination departments where they have a few full-timers but mostly on-call or volunteer firefighters, 5-year rule. If you get a single person that comes in, 5 years, because they come in, they're motivated, they get the training, then slowly their life changes. They have a relationship with someone, they get married, they have kids, and then they go away because they can't. It's that time commitment. So,
Yeah, I taught state and local government for 20 years, and I know the problem of volunteers has been there since probably the 90s. As people had two-income families, they worked out of town. I mean, it became less and less viable. Anybody else have any questions for the chief on this? Ms. Berthelot?
I just want to thank you for taking the time to give us reasons to support what you're asking for. That's really helpful in
thank you.
terms of evaluating what's appropriate.
Well,
Thank you for that.
Thank you. And, on behalf of the fire department, we appreciate anything that the council, the town manager, finance
I mean, it's not cheap to run a fire department, right? And, you know, but we appreciate the support, and we appreciate whatever, you know, funds that are come this way to be able to provide the services to the community.
Okay, any other questions? Anybody online have a question? Not seeing any. Mr. Aylesworth, where do we go from here?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Although actually, before you, as you're walking away, I think you're, you know, the forces that are working against the volunteer model, and for that matter, you know, part-time firefighters, it's, you know, it's a really strong current, but perhaps there might be a shred of optimism, small piece of optimism that I have anyway, that, you know, with COVID and the pivoting to so much virtual work, remote work, you know, we do have a lot of people that are commuting a lot less, that are working from home, and so it in no way says that, you know, we're going to go, you know, swing it back to a volunteer model, but in terms of picking up a couple people, a couple resources here and there to round out the team, you know, maybe we'll see a little bit of an uptick in other part-time or volunteers as a result of that remote work emphasis these days.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. You know, again, part of it has to, you know, one of the things we've talked about in the firehouse is we've got to start looking at this profession as a trade, and that's one of the things we're going to start with our. Once our new firefighter gets out of the academy, he has a teaching background. He was a school teacher, and I've charged him with our Explorer program. And I know, talking with some of my colleagues locally here, that we need to really start looking at the fire service as a trade, because we're an all hazards emergency response organization. We fight fires, that's only part of it. We respond to technical rescue responses, to hazmat responses, medical responses, and any other call for service that someone doesn't know who to call, they call the fire department. Because we see people on their worst day, and if they're having a bad day, and that bad day could be just cellars filling up with water, but to them, it's a bad day. So they're calling the fire department, because, oh, they got pumps, they got this, they can help me. So I think we need to, and this is one of the avenues that I'm looking to go down over the next few years, is kind of look at it as promote it as a trade versus, you know, as much as you're giving back to your community, also a trade.
Thanks, Chief.
Yeah, thank you.
So one housekeeping item on the, there was a question raised by, well, I guess we have both Mr. Osberger and Mr. Shaken getting credit for this one. Question about local law enforcement and funding in the budget in the past. And I know that staff did a little bit of research, I think went back a handful of years and found that there was funding included in the budget for such a position. Ultimately, it was never filled, and I think it was then lifted out of the budget. But historically, there were town constables that were appointed. They technically are, you know, they're appointed by the town manager. They work, I think in the past had worked, you know, cooperatively with the resident trooper's office, resident trooper program, but the sergeant, the resident trooper supervisor, has no line authority.
The sergeant always has, the state troopers always have authority over anybody doing police work in town.
Okay.
That was one
they
of
weren't
the
appointed
issues.
by, right.
Yeah, hired by the town, and you are ostensibly the chief of police.
Right.
But the constables answered to the.
So, you know, so I mean, I guess that's the relevant history for that position.
So Ryan, why wouldn't that be a cheaper way to go?
I don't think it becomes a cheaper way to go when you consider, depending on the nature of the work and what this person is responsible for doing, we have to pay to have that person trained, to outfit that person, to provide a vehicle. That vehicle breaks down, we got to pay to have it repaired, replaced. Somebody goes down, we have to backfill that. It's town responsibility. If we lose a trooper for, you know, injury or anything else, somebody gets sidelined for a while, the state police have a responsibility to fill that for us, you know, contractually. And if there's a fender bender and a cruiser gets busted up, again, that's their vehicle, that's their responsibility. So it's not that we don't bear a substantial cost, certainly for the trooper program, but you know, one of the things we talked about recently, and it's in the capital budget, I know we talked about it in a previous presentation, was, you know, with the Police Accountability Act, the additional requirements for body cams and dash cams, and that's all something that the troopers program, they're doing, they're taking care of. We need to do it for animal control, and so we're absorbing costs for that. But if we were doing that for a local law enforcement officer, local police officer, again, the cloud data storage alone can be $100,000, and so these are just all things that are, embedded in the cost of the resident trooper program for us already that we don't have to pay as a one-off, so.
All right, I see hands raised from Mr. Osberger, Mr. Shaken, and Mr. Kotchenberger. It is now 9 o'clock, and I'm hoping we can move along as efficiently as possible. Mr. Osberger.
Yes, Ryan, as I recall, though, we did quite an extensive study with effectiveness of Wood Town Constable and the reason forward with budgeting for the town constable was because it was more cost effective.
We did a great deal of work on establishing a municipal police force, and our constables actually aged out, and they were never replaced. And certainly the proposal for a municipal police force died for all these reasons.
Well, as I recall, Mayor, after that we decided we wanted to revisit that, and that's why that stuff got put into the budget, but never came to fruition.
I don't believe it ever got into the budget, but that's another question. Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Kotchenberger.
Yeah, I have a slightly different recollection, Mayor, just as a statement in response to Mr. Osberger and Ms. Berthelot. We did in perhaps Matt's last year as town manager,
yes,
and Maria Capriola's 6 months as interim, that we budgeted to hire one municipal police officer halfway through the year with the plan for the council to then, in that ensuing 6 months, evaluate and decide whether we would go forward with starting our own municipal police department or retaining the services of the Connecticut State Police. In the ensuing 6 months, we decided to retain the services of the Connecticut State Police. And those 6 months included a presentation of a significant report from a consulting firm from the Police Chiefs Association as the consultants, actually, that did recommend that we create a municipal force and bent over backwards to show us the cost savings that it would provide. But at least in my opinion, and I think in the end, the opinion of the council was that they bent a little too far backwards in a number of the assumptions that they built in, including very much their notion of how overtime would be funded in a different way than any other police officer in the state of Connecticut enjoys the benefits of overtime pay, would have meant a department much more expensive for many of the reasons that Ryan mentioned, as well.
Mr. Shaken, I didn't
staffing
want to
model.
get into that topic, which is why I said the council decided to stick with the state police. So,
but what I'm saying is, I think Mr. Osberger is correct that we did budget for the one municipal officer in the interim, but then by the time that person was going to have been hired halfway through the year, we had already made that decision. And I think that is also the sort of answer to Ms. Berthelot's question of, we've evaluated this and concluded that despite the high cost of an individual trooper compared to the salary alone and benefits of a municipal officer, that the troopers are more cost effective.
Mr. Kotchenberger.
Thank you. Well, some of this has already been said, and so I'll try to be very brief. We did look at this very, I think very extensively, and Tony, you led up that effort for years. I think Ben is being diplomatic when he says the report bent over backwards. I don't think it was a credible report in some areas, and I was surprised by that because the organization itself certainly is. But I don't think it was even a close call. The idea of substituting a small municipal department instead of the state troopers. I don't think and I think as we looked at it, there were both because of the lack of credibility in the report, or more importantly, the cost that were much more likely to be incurred, along with the training, overtime, all the equipment, all the issues that's been discussed. I just want to, at least in my mind, I'd like to put this aside. We can always study another issue again, but we look at it thoroughly, and I think the decision we reached was clearly the best one. That doesn't mean,
Mr.
though, that we-
Konchenberger, I'm going to cut you off
Excuse
because
me.
we don't need to go back to this. This was.
Well,
this
no,
was
we do, because
highly
we-
disputed. We did propose it, and we did not continue it, and we have state troopers now.
Right, so, but to continue, because I wasn't, we wasn't actually hotly disputed. I think it was actually fairly easy, a vote that was fairly, very few, there wasn't much consensus or agreement to keep it. The last point, though, is that doesn't mean we couldn't, again, look at the idea of of a constable, 1 or 2 constables. I mean, obviously, there are disadvantages to the state troopers, and the mayor set them out well a few minutes ago, earlier in the meeting. But they're not inconsistent. But what I did want to say is that we have looked closely at the idea of substituting for the state troopers, and I'm glad we didn't.
Okay. Where do we go from here?
We're changing topics, you mean?
I believe we're ready to change topics, unless there's somebody else who has another thing, without going back over the question of whether we should have municipal police officers, please.
All right, the
You
next.
may have guessed I was on the other side of that dispute, but that's okay.
So the next topic pertains to the proposed new youth services worker that would provide additional supports to middle school age kids, but would primarily focus on serving high school age kids. It's a gap that we currently, there's currently no youth services social worker that's assigned or has been providing supports to E.O. Smith kids. I'd want to make sure to draw the council's attention to one of the handouts I provided you, Superintendent Sharon Canoyer, lending her support to this proposal. I won't necessarily, overview the position that's already been done, but there were a couple targeted questions in previous council meetings about, this has been proposed in the budget largely for, cost, sort of fiscal measures, as a part-time position, and then with the idea being that depending on the challenges we run into in the coming budget year to fill the position or to retain somebody, that the potentially looking at making this position full-time benefited could certainly happen in a future budget year. But there was a question raised by council about basically what are we losing or what would we gain if this was a full-time position versus the part-time position as proposed. And then also on a related note, if we didn't end up hiring a new individual, either full-time or part-time, could some of this work be contracted out to another agency? So I know Katie Bell, our youth services program supervisor, and Pat Schneider, our human services director, I think are still with us. So I would invite them to speak to this unless somebody wants to clarify the question in a different way which I think.
Could you scroll down on the slide?
Mayor, I have a related question to this. I don't know if unless the folks want an explanation of the answer provided in writing further than the answer provided in writing, or should we just have questions?
What we have been doing so far is having a presentation of what is in writing and then asking questions. So if something more is needed, we can get it. So,
So I think Ryan asked whether it actually captured the question asked.
all right, this is a question that you and I both asked. Does this question satisfy you?
I guess it might be helpful if I also framed it in the sense of, so when we heard the original presentation, it was my understanding that you were talking about a licensed clinical social worker. And as Pat was talking about in response to some of Charlie's questions, is we seem to be going down that line, that was what this would be. And of course, that's a person who's finished an MSW program, has trained under somebody for 2 years, has taken a clinical licensing exam, and is licensed as such. They are the most expensive of the various kinds of therapists out there that we can think about hiring. So the first, for clarification, is understanding, is this person actually going to be doing therapy, and or not? And if not, why we're looking for somebody with this level of licensure. And the other question is, why aren't we expanding? There are other people who can do therapy. Why aren't we thinking about some of the other kinds of therapists who are out there, who are, just because we realize it's hard to get social workers? For instance, marriage and family therapist. And there are others out there as well who are trained therapists. But if we're not hiring a therapist, which is another question, why not just get an MSW or somebody who's not a clinician? If the person's going to be largely doing case management. And then the other question is, if we are going to be hiring a therapist, will we be billing insurance for that particular service?
I would invite Pat or Katie to speak to those questions.
Yes, I can speak to that, those questions. First of all, we are not looking at an LCSW, but an LMSW, which is the first level of the MSW licensure. So, and because we do not do billing, we don't require people to get the LCSW. Also, because it's a combination of case management and clinical work, so, you know, an MSW is the better choice. And in fact, that's, you know, what our job description, this is an additional position of a job that's, or a
Pat,
job.
can I just jump in? I don't understand how somebody can be doing being a clinician and not be a therapist. Like, are you saying there'll be a person in training on their way to become a licensed CLSW? Or I don't understand what you're saying there when you talk about them.
There's 2 levels of licensure.
I know that, but but only people who have that, who are clinicians, can do the therapy.
Actually, LMSWs can also do therapy.
But only if they're under the auspices of somebody who else is already licensed clinical social worker.
Correct.
And then the idea is that they will eventually get bumped up into that position, that's not a long-term position.
That takes minimum of 2 years to obtain an LCSW with 100 hours of supervision.
Right. So is that
and-
where this
and-
role is, this person is going to, do we have somebody else who'll be supervising this person?
So Katie Bell, who is the supervisor in that department, is a PsyD. She has her doctorate in psychology.
I don't know that she can actually.
She cannot provide LCSW supervision. I have done that, and some people go outside to get it. But because the LCSW is not required and the job isn't fully a clinical position, it takes the person who works in our department longer to get the clinical hours, if that's the direction that they go in.
But will that be the plan? Is that eventually?
It's not a plan or a requirement in our department for the person to pursue the LCSW.
But I mean, that would be what any social worker would want. I mean,
Most do, yes.
So we would need somebody to act as your supervisor, and we would have to expect that they eventually want to get bumped up to that level, that higher level, which goes back to, if we're going to be providing therapy, are we going to be billing?
No, currently we do not bill. I mean, there's a lot involved in developing a billing model. And you know, most towns do not do it. There's only a couple that I can think of that actually do insurance billing. And there's a number of reasons why. There's a lot of costs that are associated with that, as well as administrative components.
We're billing for the ambulance services now, so
Correct.
it seems like the town has some
And
intel.
it's certain, yes, and it's certainly something that the town could investigate, the ability to bill for services. But they haven't up to this point, quite frankly. I've investigated it in several times in the past, not since I've been here. But when I worked in Glastonbury, certainly, and the cost benefits, it did not outweigh itself. Because there's a number of parameters around having that level, but it is certainly something that could be investigated in the future if that's something that the town was looking to pursue.
Mr. Sharon?
Yeah, quick, to the extent this person is providing clinical services, will that be on an emergency basis or on an ongoing basis?
It's both. We do respond to emergent needs, but we do some ongoing, as well as we do some work right in the schools on a regular basis with kids who are struggling.
Is it a customary model to have ongoing clinical services provided by on this kind of basis? I certainly understand on an emergency ongoing basis is that.
Again, each town is different. I can say that the other towns that I've worked for do have clinical services and do some ongoing work. We basically evaluate on a case-by-case basis. If it makes more sense for a child to see someone who is a specialist in a particular area, or if they require medication management, which we do not do, then we refer out or we work with another psychiatrist. So we do a lot of screening, we do a lot of screening, short-term, and refer out. I can tell you that. We do some ongoing services as well.
Ms. Berthot, has your question been answered?
So I'm still wondering about why are we narrowing it down? So I'm still concerned about who's going to supervise this person if this person's doing therapy. And I'm also concerned about why are we only thinking about, if this is the role of, this person will be a therapist, why are we not thinking of other kinds of licensures that provide therapy in order to broaden our search?
I do want to clarify that this person isn't only a therapist, they are a social worker. So they do a combination of case management, resource coordination, group work, positive youth development work, family work. So it's not a straight clinical position. None of our positions are straight clinical positions.
Okay, thank you for that. And that leads back to the question of the part-time or full-time.
I can say, first of all, Youth Service Advisory really had requested that it be a full-time position. Again, for budgetary reasons and constraints, that it was presented as a part-time position, but it certainly is more challenging to keep a full-time position. A part-time position. I can also say that, doing community work is a lot different than working in a clinic, in the sense that you really have to develop the relationships with the schools, with the community itself, with the other service providers. And that's much more challenging if you have a lot of turnover. So it's great if we can get somebody and keep them. There certainly are sometimes people out there that are looking for part-time positions, but my experience everywhere has been that unless you find one of those special people, you will have a lot more turnover in a part-time position than you will ever in a full.
So that's a great answer, and I agree. Social workers are best trained in both those areas. I still, though, concerned about the question of if we're doing therapy, who's going to be doing the supervision, and if you're going to go with this lower licensure, and also recognizing that eventually this person will have the greater license, so will either leave or demand more money, and also recognizing, I don't know what else I was recognizing. Seems like there was something else out there.
I can say that it is a good job working for the town. There are a lot of benefits working for the town, and I'm not just saying, from a financial point of view, but on average, social workers often only stay a couple years and then move on. And we've had really good, fortunate luck that the people that we've chosen are really committed to this position and have stayed. And you're right, people do work on to another level, but we have LCSWs that have stayed on as well because they like this kind of work. They enjoy the community work. They enjoy the variety. They enjoy being able to go out and work with people, on an outreach model and do a lot of prevention work. So, we have been able to retain social workers as well, which is great. The last person that we just, just replaced, Danielle, is an executive director of a nonprofit right now. So,
So is Danielle a licensed clinical social worker?
Danielle is now a licensed clinical
So she
social
was not
worker.
doing therapy?
You can do therapy with the LMSW
But you need to be
with the appropriate
supervised.
supervise.
So who
Yes.
is supervising Danielle?
So we have other LCSWs, including myself in the department. And she was getting some outside supervision as well.
Okay.
Is there enough work for this position to be full-time?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, Mr., I don't know whose hand went up first. Mr. Shakin's on the top of the screen, so you go first.
Sure.
Mr. Coleman goes
Sure.
second.
I have similar questions to Terry's. I think I just want to make sure I understand before we move on. And by the way, Ryan, the live stream video is not coming through on my Zoom, at least. I don't know if it got turned off somewhere, but I don't see the video of the council chamber right now. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear that the person who would come into this role, part of their job would be doing something that only someone who had clinical credentials would be qualified to do, that they are providing enough clinical services, therapy, evaluation, whatever, that I could not come in and be hired as a caseworker. And I mean, not me, but someone who was qualified to work with children without a master's degree, without the ability to, with 2 years of clinical work, become a independently licensed practitioner, that they are doing something that's within the scope of practice of an LMSW. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct.
And is what they're doing also, from a clinical perspective, something that could be within the scope of practice of a licensed professional counselor or a licensed marriage and family therapist or licensed alcohol and drug counselor, or of the associate licensures associated with the first two of those positions?
So the clinical work, yes, there's a variety of different professions that can do clinical work. In fact, again, the person who heads that youth service bureau is a PsyD. She has a doctorate in psychology and is absolutely licensed at a level that she can do clinical work.
Right.
But it's the other parts, the case management, and some of the other components of the job that the social work profession is best suited to perform. And there's title protection too. The position itself that we have is called a youth service social worker. So you have to hire a social worker in that position. We would have to create a different position in order to, at least a different job title in order to hire someone from those other. And I'm not saying that some people from those positions might not be able to do casework. It's just the social work profession is best trained to do. That's a critical component of the generalist part of the social work training.
Thanks. That's helpful. I think the reason that I'm at least asking this specifically is in organizations that I'm familiar with that do both clinical work and case management work. You know, when you have someone who commands the premium that a licensed professional commands in pay, that you need that person to spend all of their time doing that work because that is the work that you can bill to insurance companies. And that is the only way to pay for a LCSW or an LMSW to be on your staff. And that then there are staff who are not credentialed who often handle the clinical work. And so when I hear we need an LMSW and LCSW to do a job that is primarily, or at least partially, mostly, I don't know which is the right adverb, case management and not sort of clinical services, I'm just a little concerned that we might be sort of over hiring for what it is that the position
Right.
does,
And-
especially given what you said at the budget meeting about the shortage that I know exists from my professional work
Absolutely.
of clinical staff across the state and across the country, especially at the part-time level. So that's just the sort of reason for my question.
Right. And I can say we do have the other level in the department as well, that bachelor's level profession as well. You know, we have an outreach worker at the senior center. We have our early childhood coordinator position is also a bachelor's level position. So it's not that it doesn't exist. It's that, you know, these positions in youth services particularly require the ability to do the therapeutic component as well.
Okay, does that answer your question, Mr. Shakin?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Coleman.
Yes, this position is for, looks like the middle school, E.O. Smith, Region 19. Is that right?
Correct. And actually, what I want to say about that, I know it says the schools, but it's actually about the age group, because we have kids that go to private schools, we have kids that are homeschooled, we have kids that are going to a technical school. And you know, it's about more about the age than the actual, it's actually connected to the school, because that's another difference between our services and the school services. It's open to residents of the town.
I would think that this would be a Board of Education budget item and a Region 19 budget item.
So it really isn't, because schools are more tied to school-related issues and problems. They and not all kids, some kids do very well in school, but the problems that they have are exhibited in the community and in the home situation. So we're able to see kids for non-school related issues. We're able to see kids over the summer. We're able to see kids with their families and in non-traditional ways. So like I said, it's really about the age group versus.
Where are they
versus
going
the
to be
link to the
based?
school.
In the schools itself, or are they going to have an office?
We do
based in
some,
schools?
we do some work in the schools, but a lot of our work happens in our offices. And some of it actually happens in the homes because we're able to do home visits.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Mr. Osberger?
So Pat, in relation to these, the administrative state police officer that has been proposed, and then with respect to this position, what are the differences between the two?
One's a social worker that does clinical and therapeutic work and case management and work with the families, and the other is a police officer. They have very, very different roles.
Okay, any further questions on this? All right,
Can I ask one more question?
go ahead.
Have we looked into the cost of insurance for providing clinical services?
That's part of the town's insurance rider. We've provided clinical services since well before I started here.
That's what I'm missing. Where are we, I'm sorry to be so dense, I'm always dense. Where are we providing clinical services?
Currently,
Yeah,
Youth Services has been providing clinical services for years.
Providing therapy.
Yes. Both group and individual and family. I mean, all three.
Okay.
Yep.
And we're doing that. Who is the licensed person doing that?
Everybody's licensed.
Okay. They're licensed psychologists.
There's one licensed psychologist and there are 2 licensed social workers.
And the licensed social workers are clinical social workers or
They're
licensed MSWs?
One's an LMSW and the new person we brought on is going to be is posed to sit for her LCSW, but she's an LMSW now.
Okay. And who is
And I'm an
supervising?
LMSW as well.
Who are supervising the 2 licensed social workers who are providing therapy?
Both Katie, who's a PsyD, and of course I oversee the whole department. So
But in what role as a clinician are you overseeing them?
I'm overseeing them administratively. If they're working toward the next level of their licensure, I have done some supervision in that area as well, and some have gotten outside supervision. So it's a combination of clinical hours. Like you can't become an LCSW until you put in so many clinical hours.
Right.
And then I've gotten so many hours of LCSW supervision.
So are you acting as their clinical, are you a licensed clinical social worker?
I am a licensed clinical
Okay, so
social worker.
are you providing their supervision as for the therapy?
So I am doing some of the supervision, particularly if are challenging cases that come up, challenging, but if someone's working for the licensure, and I will provide all of that if someone's working toward their LCSW and needs the hours, our other LMSW in the office has the hours and has the supervision and has not yet sat for the test. So, so that is happening. We do have that happen here in our department.
And
Yes.
that person will hopefully pass the exam and will be, when you retire, congratulations.
Oh, so the word's out, huh?
When you retire, that person should be licensed and should be able to supervise this
Actually,
new
both
person.
both people, and we may have someone that we hire that's already licensed. So, I mean, we're able to track someone who is waiting to sit for the test.
Okay.
For our new position. So.
All right. Thank you, Pat.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any more? Anything else on human services? All right, Mr. Aylesworth, where do we go from here?
I have a question. I had my hand up.
Oh, I'm
One last
sorry, Mr.
question.
Coleman.
Will the social worker be providing services to children from Ashford and Wellington? Well,
No.
any hospice? Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe before Pat cycles off, just because it's, question related to human services, it comes past the next one. There was a question about the $5,000 funding support for the senior center from the general fund, and staff provided a written response, but just in case Pat intends to sign off, maybe we just make sure that satisfies the question.
Mr. Bruder, this was your question about the $5,000?
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's a sufficient answer. I appreciated the answer.
Okay, thank you. The next question was Parks and Rec.
There was actually a question, sorry, this is the one I skipped over. You had
Okay.
asked a question about trends in health insurance and whether or not we experience a plateau. And so, again, staff, I think, provided a straightforward explanation, but don't want to gloss over that, Mayor, if there was more information you wanted from finance. I have the question up here on the screen and the answer.
I think the answers have been given in prior meetings, frankly. This is.
Right. All right, there were a few different questions related to Parks and Rec. Some, I guess, a little bit more specific. I would invite Jay O'Keefe, since he's here, up to the table. First question, somebody observed a badge scanner showing an expiration date of 2099, and so we'll start there. Jay, if you want to speak to that.
I would assume that because they're going to the community center, they're so healthy, they're just going to live that long.
I think you're right, Mayor. But as you said last time, you were correct on your hunch with the answer basically being Silver Sneakers or Renew Active folks. We need to put something into the system because those folks, for an expiration date that is, those folks do not pay for a membership directly to us. It's insurance subsidized or supported, so that's the short answer to that question. There are a few larger donors when the community center was also built, such as Wilcox and Reynolds family, Michael Gergler, I believe, and some others that were, very generous donors. That the agreement was also for some of those larger donors to receive lifetime memberships.
There were questions about the impact in Parks and Rec when the fee waivers become more limited and restricted. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure, as I have, answered here in writing, I mean, there has been significant impact. I mean, the history on this was that the fee waiver program, a great resource for those in need, I believe, was starting to climb higher and higher in terms of the amount of expense that was on the town. So there was a back in 2015, I believe, it had been looked at by, I believe, the Finance Committee and then adopted by the Council in terms of a cap. So it's relatively new when you add in the COVID years. The past couple of years, it's relatively new since 2015. What we've seen is two things. One is families making difficult decisions, as most families do need to make, but because the cap is probably low enough that they're making decisions between, for example, some families, not all families, but between, let's say, before and after school care and summer camp, because both those programs, if you needed, as I have a few examples in there, if you needed that service every day, then it would far exceed the cap of for most families in terms of what they're allotted for per year. So that's just one quick example. There are many different variations of that. So basically what we've seen is it impacts folks in terms of what they're able to send their children to. It's not just necessarily discretionary type things. It's really, childcare on some level, whether that be summer camp before after school care. And then the financial impact to the Parks and Recreation Fund, where we used to see about $100,000 to $125,000 of kind of that revenue coming in through that the general fund to the Park and Rec Fund on a reimbursement at the end of the year. With that cap, it's greatly reduced that number down to about 40,000, and some years lower than that. So that's the other impact.
Do you think this is negatively impacting these families? I mean, is this something we should look at to raise?
I would suggest that, it's been in place now, I guess 7 years, but a couple of those years that I referenced have been kind of unique years. It's probably time to maybe relook at that. I mean, I definitely hear from, our staff hears from families that struggle with that. What's been helpful has been the Helping Hands program recently with that grant, and then last year we had in addition to the camperships that are out there, we had worked with youth services on a grant from the state. Now that grant was last year. It just was announced as coming out this year. But when those grants go away, then we were kind of, the problem, although it's been minimized, I guess what I'm trying to say, in recent year because of those two grants, it's still a lingering issue around the corner if those grants were to go away, which they will be.
I would like to see it's a little more, another look at this to see whether we have been overly restrictive in this program, and if we could afford to give more families more options. But that's my personal, I'm not speaking for the council, certainly, my personal preference. I've been very concerned with the reduction from, I think one year it was 125 or 140, those numbers are in my head for some reason, and to go down by 100,000 means we are losing a lot of families. And it seems to me that this is something that we could afford to be a little bit more generous with. But I assume, I'm not asking that for this budget, but for not in the not too distant future.
I think the last piece of the kind of three-prong, if it was only three-prong Parks and Rec question, was just asking the director to speak to a little bit more what he sees as the potential for increase in membership.
Right, so the question was asked about that potential. You know, if you look at, I interpreted it, you know, primarily from what we've seen in the pandemic the last couple of years. So my written response primarily focuses on that. That said, we know that the fiscal year leading up to, you know, just prior to the pandemic, we started to, you know, have some concerns in terms of the longevity or the sustainability of the recreation program fund as a whole. So that's throughout all parks and recreation, not just the community center. But focusing on memberships, you know, we conservatively looked at, you know, where we might be about this time next year or at the end of next fiscal year. We're anticipating or have budgeted for and have, you know, relatively good confidence, not being able to predict the future with pandemics, but that we would see about 123% increase in membership revenue in comparison to what we saw during the pandemic, and that we have budgeted for about 93% of what we saw in the last full fiscal year prior to a pandemic. So we are being somewhat conservative, but also optimistic in terms of the growth in comparison to what we've seen in the past couple of years. And there's a number of things that we're trying to do. As it says, we're looking at marketing and business planning, consultation services, focusing on not forgetting our seniors. I always want to make sure I'm very careful how I say that. We love our seniors, but also looking to, you know, try to attract more families in and more of our maybe, you know, single younger adults in to that mix. So I could talk in length about all the different ways that we do that, but in general, it's a combination of a variety of things that we're not just hoping the pandemic goes away and people come back. We're actually aggressively looking at a plan for how to attract people in through a variety of different means, so, and retain them. So.
I must say, in the last couple of weeks, the parking lots have been a little bit fuller, which is a good sign.
Until April vacation camp. Well, our camps are doing well, but until April vacation came, and then it gets a little quieter. But during the usual kids' times after school, and I know it's a little quieter, but you're right. As we have started to see a little bit of an increase, and so we'll see. Sometimes with the good weather, and our community has, you know, it shifts gears a little bit in May, so sometimes that just patterns a little bit too. But we're hopeful that things will continue to grow.
Mr. Konchenberger, followed by Mr. Coleman.
Thanks. Just, and we can, maybe not the time tonight, certainly, but on the fee waiver issue, I mean, I agree with the mayor, well, I think no one is disagreeing, that it's an issue, and I would agree, we want to allow more families to participate. It is, as I understood it, I remember we spent time on this back in, I think, 2015 or whatever. It is in many ways an accounting issue, not to trivialize that at all, but we're not, the fact that we need, the rec center has to have money put into it in order to approve a fee waiver is not because fee waivers cost, they don't cost the town or the rec center anything in general, I believe. What it is, it's an agreement, to still run programs and allow some people in them who either don't pay or don't pay the full amount. That has to, for accounting reasons, that needs to be, that's a scholarship, for example, and that needs to be, that deficit needs to be offset by a transfer from the general fund or some other fund. It doesn't have to be that way, I don't think. And in fact, that gives us, I believe, more flexibility than we may think in terms of expanding that program. Because again, we're not paying out any money, we're agreeing to take less money or no money from some individuals, and which results in a financial debit. But that is not because the money is going out the door. But anyway, so going forward, I agree, and I think we should look at this again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katzenberger. Mr. Coleman.
Yeah, Jay, I just want to comment, and thank you for answering the questions very thoroughly tonight. Very helpful. Thanks.
Oh, okay, you're welcome.
All right, any further questions on Parks and Rec? I attended the concert on Friday, and I think it's very interesting that the parking was being directed by the head of Parks and Rec. So you definitely were working out of class or something. It was.
We do everything, all of us.
That's the good side of Mansfield public employment. Everybody does a little bit of everything. So thank you again.
Have a good evening.
Or no, I wouldn't say master of none, because he's head of the department. He's got to be master of quite a few things. He's good at parking too, so. All right, I think we have come to the end of the,
Yeah, there was just one, again, staff provided a response to the question about
Oh,
the
fund
fund
balance
balance and workers' comp. So
workers' comp.
does that answer satisfy the question by Mr.
Yeah.
Katzenberger?
Yeah, I had one follow-up, but it has nothing to do with the budget, so let's not do it tonight.
okay, thank you.
So, oh, well, I was just gonna say, so to remind the council, Monday is at least scheduled to be the night that the budget's adopted. So there's also Wednesday held in reserve for budget adoption if it's needed. So the way I look at it is maybe unlike last year at this particular evening, we've had a pretty robust discussion tonight as well as previous nights around several areas of proposed new investment. And just out of recognition that for staff to do our job, to be ready for the council to act on the budget and do its work Monday or Wednesday, whenever this happens, but assuming we're still targeting Monday, there are motions and dollar amounts and everything that needs to be very carefully, put to bed. And so if what has been proposed in town manager's budget, based on these discussions we're having, if it's the council's desire, and I know no votes are taken in a budget workshop, but if there's a desire, or I guess maybe I should say if there's a compelling quasi-consensus signal the council wishes to convey to staff tonight so that we make corresponding adjustments, even if we don't crunch the numbers, if there's a direction you're looking to head, i.e., something different than what's been proposed with staffing, we would obviously want to try to do that work to be ready for Monday, not try to do it on the fly or so I guess I'm just looking for some guidance to get a sense of what the council's wishes are here.
Mr. Osberger.
So, flagged items, and I'm kind of looking at it in the columns, I put yeses or nos. Where do we sit with those? Do we go into executive session and say, hey, we don't want that? Yes, we do want that. What do we do here?
We don't do that in executive session. That's in public.
Asking the question.
Yeah. I would suggest that that you prepare the motions assuming your budget is adopted.
Okay.
I would assume that there's some interest, all right, let's start with the Public Works. Is there a significant interest in adding the third person to the group, to the two that the Department of Public Works has added? No, wait, I want to step back. I don't think we're ready to do this because I think the parties need to caucus, both of them, and to come up with a proposal which we will get to you as hopefully before Monday morning.
Right. I guess that's the main thing is that, we don't want to be trying to do new number crunching calculations on the fly Monday if the goal is to actually adopt a budget Monday. It's just that's a lot to try to pull off in a coherent fashion.
Yes.
Especially with a handful of items that are sort of up for discussion.
Some things,
I have a question about
but the
question I
impact-
asked.
Wait, just 1 second, Mr. Sharon's been recognized.
There's some things clearly we might desire, but impact would be, general impact would be, make a firm decision on that.
Right.
Right, and so I guess, so it'd be helpful, and I understand, I think what the mayor's proposing, that maybe that signal, I guess, well, so before Monday, whenever it happens, whether it's tonight or communication that happens, it's conveyed to me Monday morning, whenever the time is right, I guess, to this point, this is where I was going with it. If there's additional, there's support for a concept, but we want to know what the actual financial impact of doing that is, staff would need time to project out this new mill rate, that sort of thing, and those are all things, I want to provide you that information because it's obviously essential.
Yes. And that would have to be part of the discussion on Monday night.
Right,
So
there needs to be lead time to do
Yes.
this.
So I would suggest that that the parties caucus and come up with proposals, and that we refer these to the town manager as late Sunday or early Monday morning, so that there is some real time to do some calculations. And if it isn't enough time to do the calculations, then we'll have to.
Right, I would say that if
work on
you're flexible,
Wednesday.
well, obviously, staff will do our level best to provide, as quick a turnaround as needed. But depending, I guess, on exactly what the feedback is and how much there is to work through, I just hope the council would understand, we may be recommending that we forego Monday in favor of Wednesday if there's just not time to do what you're asking. Or just, we could open the meeting, but I'm just saying not necessarily expect to complete business on Monday if staff can't produce what's been requested.
I think that's appropriate, that if we can't get it done on Monday, we may not go on to Wednesday. Mr. Coleman, you have your hand up?
Yeah, in regards to the April 13th question on the auditorium lighting, that's not the answer I got that evening. The answer I got that evening was that the auditorium wasn't part of the planned upgrades to the middle school.
That's right.
Yep.
And this one says the issue is that if the lighting fails at any point before the decision is made on MMS upgrades, the lighting will no longer work. That's kind of a silly answer, honestly. What are we expecting, a failure? Is there something there that's going to create a failure?
I believe, Mr. Coleman, that the facilities people said to us that it was possible that it would fail soon. And so it was necessary to do the repair as soon as possible, that it wouldn't interfere in any way with the renovations, because the renovations would not cover the auditorium in any case, or would not cover auditorium lighting in any case. They will replace the seats, which badly need it, but they were not proposing to change the lighting other than this upgrade, which is proposed for us in this budget.
The answer to the question was a little vague. It didn't, thanks for clarifying that, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. All right, is there anybody here from the public who wishes to speak to the council? Or has anybody contacted you, Mr. Manager? All right, then the next item on the agenda is a motion to adjourn. Is there anybody wishing to go home? Moved by Mr. Osberger, seconded by Ms. Berthelot. All those in flavor, all those in favor, please raise your hands.
Flavor's okay.
Good night,
I
all.
can't figure.
Good night, everybody.
I did it.
Thank you, everyone.
Night.
Recording stopped.